12 months ago, I was a sobbing mess. I lay on my side in the shadowy corner of a barn on the edge of town, curling in toward myself and covering my face with a quivering pair of hooves. The only thing more potent than the pangs of grief blistering through me was that immense cold, something that chilled me to the bone. For days, the frigidity had been my nemesis, a cryptic sensation that haunted and horrified me through the streets of Ponyville. At that time, however, hidden in the dust and hay of the abandoned barn, I welcomed the freezing sensation, for the shivers it gave me nearly shook my tears loose, making me think that none of what I was going through was even happening. Through hiccuping breaths, I smelled the rustic surroundings around me. I felt one with the detritus, a lost and forgotten piece of history. My saddlebag, full of meager belongings, had been tossed in the corner upon my stumbling arrival. In the sparse beams of sunlight needling through the barn's porous ceiling beams, I could barely tell the difference between my lyre and the random bits of farm junk that surrounded it. Another sob and another shiver. I heard my voice squeaking free from chapped lips, and it sounded like a perfect stranger.
Oh, if only I could forget myself as well.
My life would be a great deal more manageable if I could no longer remember the sensation still hounding me, of a raving pony wreaking havoc all across town, of Twilight Sparkle's face looking through me as if I were invisible, and of the great height that stretched beneath me as I stood on the town hall building's rooftop and teetered on the brink. I whimpered and buried my face in my hooves, feeling like a little foal. I had tried fleeing from this place, running eastward. If I could have galloped all the way home to Canterlot, I would have. But no less than half a mile from the edge of Ponyville, a horrible wall of cold assaulted me, to the point that I started losing feeling in my limbs. I rushed back to the center of town, collected my nerves, and tried trotting west this time instead. After the same distance traveled, an invisible blizzard struck my body, and I had to return to the heart of my sudden prison. There was no sense in asking any pony for help. As a matter of fact, I didn't want to even look at them. The residents of Ponyville were cheerful, and they had every reason and right to be, and I didn't hate them for it. I hated myself. Stumbling across their paths, being subjected to their rosy expressions, served only to remind me of how cold, hungry, and scared I was. So I did what all three of these factors persuaded me to do. I hid away. I ran to the west edge of town, where the cold was bearable enough to endure, but grating enough to keep me awake. I threw myself into the hollow of that abandoned barn on the side of the dirt road. I wanted to collect my thoughts, but I soon had an even more impossible task to accomplish. I had to collect my spirit, but that had all too swiftly shattered into 100 unrecoverable pieces, like the tears leaking over my hooves and onto the dirt floor and the hay. Even if I could put myself back together again, I wasn't sure that I wanted to. I didn't like the idea of what that soul would be tethered to, of what fate it had to anticipate. It's one thing to be homeless, but nameless? You can live in a mansion paid for by the world's largest fortune. You can build 1,000,000 houses, 1,000,000 acres of land, and 1,000,000 servants dwelling on it to all do your bidding. You can even have your very own plot in the ground reserved for you in the world's most sacred cemetery. So long as you're nameless, you do not have a place to call home. Not in this lifetime, nor beyond. I contemplated this, cried over it, despaired and shivered and collapsed over it, when she first arrived. Land's sakes! Her drawling voice echoed against the dilapidated walls of the barn. My ears picked up a quartet of hooves scraping through the wooden doorframe as the figure entered from the bright world outside. I knew I heard something. Hello? Some pony? Who's there? I didn't realize that I still had energy left in my body until I found myself bolting upright with a gasp. I turned toward her, and the first thing I saw were her freckles. A bright slit of sunlight captured a pair of green eyes, followed by the warmest smile that I had seen in 3 starving days. Whoa! Howdy there! She waved 2 of her hooves high above her head to show that she was harmless. I saw a brown hat, a long blonde mane, and 2 baskets of apples that hung from either side. Take it easy, Sugar Cube. I didn't mean to scare you or nothing. She looked strong, fearless, the very definition of a working earth pony. Then all of those iron features immediately melted into a soft and sisterly gaze of concern. Oh, darling, you're an absolute mess. I could hear you crying like a poor widow from the road over yonder. Is everything okay?" What could I say to her? What could I say to any pony that would carry the smallest degree of meaning? Life had given me a hammer and chisel, but my world had turned out to be mud and sand. I almost wish I had played dead instead of responding to her. Maybe I would have gone unnoticed like the ghost that I had already become. Instead, she stared steadily at me and said this. "You realize that this here barn's been abandoned for a few decades, right? You must be a long way from home." Her words were delicious, like soothing musical notes that I hadn't the fortune of discovering until then, and they were gracious enough to squeeze even more moisture from my eyes. I barely sniffled, though. I was too busy staring, not at her, but at the twin baskets of red fruit adorning her figure. I was suddenly aware of how dry my mouth felt. There was a deep rumble, like the wooden structure of the barn was settling all around us. She heard it too, but was in a far saner condition to recognize it. "Hungry, ain't you?" She smirked, following the angle of my eyes. "Let's start on the right hoof, shall we? My name's Applejack. Here." She twisted her head around and balanced a red piece of fruit on her nose, then tossing it my way. "Have an orange." That's an old family joke. I suddenly couldn't hear her. My taste buds were screaming over my ears, for I had scarfed down the contents of the apple in less than a minute. Choking would have been bearable so long as I had wrangled a few tender morsels down my throat. Once I had bitten my way to the core, I wasn't entirely sure if it had helped my hunger any, but it had certainly dried my tears. Applejack was whistling. "Whoa, Nellie! Easy there, girl. Good thing I washed them things before taking them to market, huh?" She sat down on her haunches in front of me. "Well, I told you my name. Reckon I might get a chance to learn yours?" I shuddered, avoiding her stare as well as her question. Even nowadays, I think I say my name out loud only to appease myself. I certainly wasn't the one to invent it, and if I was to give myself a fitting replacement, would anything announce it better than the sound of my own lyre? All that mattered was that, at the time, something was gnawing at me far more than either cold or hunger. Applejack was real and warm and there. I was willing to do anything, or say anything, just to shatter the looming horizon of loneliness that threatened to drown it all. "Lyra," I ultimately whispered. "Lyra Heartstrings." "Lyra?" She murmured aloud with a nod, reaching her hoof up. She tilted the brim of her hat and smiled placidly my way. "That's a mighty fine name you've got there, Lyra." My vision blurred instantly again. I could feel my heart beating. I wanted to hold her, and I wanted her to hold me. I wanted to be warm and safe and happy. I knew none of it would last, though. None of this would last. I should have grabbed my saddlebag, galloped out of the barn, and hid myself away in the forest where they'd be less intelligent creatures to smile at me, feed me, and remind me that I was something worthy and capable of being cherished, just as Applejack's soothing voice was caressing all of the shivering ends of me, like I was not just some dirt-covered, tear-stained piece of refuse. "I know this town like the back of my hoof," Applejack continued. "And I must say I've never seen you around these parts before, Lyra. Are you visiting family or something? Is there some pony I can take you to? There's no need to be wasting away in some dirty old barn now, is there?" She squinted at me and blinked. Miss Heartstrings?" At first, I wondered why she was asking me so many questions. As soon as the image of her teetered and was swallowed by perpetual shadow, it suddenly made sense. I was blacking out. I fainted like some pathetic damsel, my whole body going limp. Starvation, it seemed, wasn't so exhausting until you reminded yourself that you were capable of eating. I collapsed from the sensation. When I came to, the world was 1,000 times brighter than inside of that dark little barn. I saw the ground passing beneath me, and when I glanced up, the horizon was bobbing. "Hey there!" I felt the vibration of her voice. With a shuddering breath, I realized she was carrying me across her back. A dirt road led toward a red barn house nestled in a sea of apple trees, and we were gliding toward the bright epicenter. The world beyond the crest of Ponyville grew colder and colder, but Applejack's warm body and breath melted all of my shivers away. "Just relax, Sugar Cube. I'm taking you somewhere safe. You're gonna be just fine." "This?" I fought for an even breath, draped across her spine. Days of running, panic, across the lengths of Ponyville brought an ache to my limbs that I was just then discovering.
This is where you live?
You betcha! Sweet Apple Acres, home of the finest bounty of red fruit in all of Equestria. We passed the wooden fences and apple carts. I could hear distant livestock and smell bales of hay. But my family and I can give you the grand tour later. You look as though you might have caught a nasty fever, Lyra. Let's get you warmed up. I immediately gasped. You remember my name? Well, of course, darling. Just 'cause the Apple family is simple farming folk doesn't make us simple-minded. There are times that I feel as though the only infinite resource in the world is tears. Closing my eyes, I smiled, a fractured porcelain thing, and clung securely to her. The world was bright all around me, as if a righteous fire was burning away the frayed edges of a nightmarish veil that had been hanging over my head for 3 days. I was almost sad to be let go. I opened my eyes, realizing that I was suddenly inside this blessed mayor's house. I had been plopped down in front of a sofa in the middle of an antique living room full of family pictures, heirlooms, and home-crafted decorations. There was a fireplace in front of me, and it was as empty as I felt. The sight of it made me shiver, and Applejack must have seen it, for soon she was grabbing planks of dried wood from a metal stand. Here, let me light this up. You make yourself comfortable, and I'll get Granny Smith to fix you some soup. Granny Smith? Just then, my ears pricked to hear the sound of voices at the far end of the house. Applejack and I were not alone. The place was alive, and I felt very alien sitting there on the family's immaculate sofa with my tousled mane and stained coat. Her name is Lyra Heartstrings, Granny! I heard Applejack shout across the interior, continuing a conversation that I in my numb state was only partially able to follow. I found her just outside of town. Poor thing looks like she's long overdue for some real hospitality. I bit my lip, squirming under a fresh curtain of shivers. I thank you very much, Miss Applejack, but you really don't need to go to all this length just to... My voice trailed off. I was suddenly bathing in a sea of toasty warmth. The fireplace had been lit, as my tears embraced the delicious crackling noises of the burning wood. My body veritably melted into the folds of the couch. Oh, Celestia, that's nice, I murmured with a drunken smile. Applejack's grin back was a lot more charming. Nothing treats a sick spell better than bathing in the Apple family's fireplace. She winked. Oh, shucks, I remember when I first had the pony pox. Cuddling up before this here mantle got me through all sorts of feverish nights. I'm not sick, I said as politely as I could. I felt a sore lump building in my throat. I didn't want to sponge up too much of this kind mare's generosity, but at the same time it felt like the first occasion I had in days to relax and let go. I wanted to pour all of my troubles onto some pony, but I didn't want to burden them with something I barely even understood myself. I'm lost, Applejack, I blurted. I ran a hoof through my frazzled mane and stifled my whimpers before they could form. I'm so lost, I don't even know where to start. Well, I don't know about you, but I reckon that home is the best place to start.
Home?
That's what makes a pony, or so I've always thought. She placed the metal fire guard down before the brick-laid hearth and trotted toward me. A while ago, when I was just a little filly, I left this farm and headed out to the city, thinking I could live a different kind of life than the rest of my family. Boy, was that one of the plumb stupidest decisions in my life. I nearly cried my eyes out for days until I ran right back home. After that, everything was just right. She stood above me and gently dragged a hoof over my mane, plucking a free random leaf and stalk of hay I had collected in the barn where she had found me. Sometimes we leave home, even if it means running away from the place that means most to us, 'cause we're so desperate to find ourselves. And what happens? We only get more lost.
I didn't run away from home, Applejack,
I said with a soft sigh. An invisible gust of wind came out of nowhere. The fireplace suddenly seemed miles away as images of Canterlot flicked through my mind.
I would give anything to go back there, but I can't.
And just why is that, Sugar Cube? I bit my lip. Goosebumps were forming under my coat. I clutched my forelimbs to my chest and fought away the icy shadows for as long as I could. Applejack had been so kind to me. The last thing she needed was an emaciated guest collapsing in the center of her living room. Never in my life had I anticipated becoming what I was then. A vagabond, a bum, a unicorn with no purpose or title. All my life, I had seen riffraff gathered in the far shadier streets of Canterlot, and I had always regarded them with both pity and curiosity. Now I was sitting in their place, carrying the same disgusting scent, and even those impoverished souls had more than I did. Even if I could make my way back home, would I be able to stake claim to that which once was attached to me? Would my parents be able to help me any? Mom? Dad? Nothing, I murmured, my lips quivering. There's nothing for me to go back to. I huddled in the deeper contours of the sofa. For a moment, I wished that it was a coffin instead. Well, right now, we've got a place for you here, Sugar Cube, Applejack said. Her selflessness was only outshone by the bright smile on her face as she swiftly trotted towards a closet, opened it up, and rummaged through the rows of hanging jackets inside. I've got something else for you. It's just a thing for them feverish shivers of yours. After a modicum of effort, she emerged with a stone-gray article hanging from her mouth. She dropped it by my side. Here you go, a little something I used to wear when I was a bit younger for working around the orchards in autumn and all. Of course, I rarely use it these days, on account I've grown myself a second skin. I looked at her, then at her gift. After a squinting study, I realized it was a long-sleeved sweater jacket. Without a second thought, I encased the item in glowing telekinesis and all but flung it over my forward half. Finally, with only a little fuss, I slid my hooves all the way through and sat comfortably with the hoodie encasing my shivering limbs. Soon, the goosebumps shrank away, as if the jacket was somehow absorbing the heat wafting toward me from the fireplace. Looking back, I think it was the gesture itself that did the trick. Applejack was willing to give a little piece of herself, and it was like being engulfed in a non-stop hug from her. I couldn't help but smile, for I remembered what it felt like to be in the company of a pony who was more than a stranger. I was more than ready to call this polite and thoughtful mare a friend.